Ladies and gentlemen, people are playing the pistol round wrong. Classic versus Ghost is a common question that people ask, and frankly, everyone seems to be just jamming the Ghost, but in a lot of cases, the Classic is actually far better. So, in this video, let's break down exactly when you should pick each gun and tell you exactly what you need to do to turn that first round pistol win into a second and third round win that could snowball all the way to the end of the game, making it so you easily win games on the back of pistol round. Speaking of classic pistols, you know what's always classic? Smashing that sub button. So do me a huge solid, smash that GameLeap sub button, and you're gonna be caught up to date with all the tips and tricks that you need in order to start popping off in Valorant. Anyways, without further ado, let's just jump right into it, shall we? So people often ask the question, which gun should I use and why? The first round is so important to win because, as we said before, it can create snowball, and the second round is almost a free win if you play it correctly after you win the pistol round. So that means every pistol round could easily be worth 2+ rounds and can snowball to even more, plus more eco that can help you out later on. Now you start off with 800 credits and it's 500 total credits to get this Ghost, and you cannot buy armor with the Ghost, and you sacrifice tons of utility but for slightly increased damage. Now, you might be asking, what is the damage difference between the Ghost and the Classic? So let's break that down. From the most important range amount, which would be 0 to 30 meters, with no armor, the Classic will do 78 damage to the head, while the Ghost will do 105 damage to the head. An important distinction in that the headshot will actually one-shot without armor from 30 meters or less with the Ghost, and it will not with the Classic. Now, for the body, it's 26 versus 33, and for the leg, it's 22 for the Classic and 26 for the Ghost. Now, something that's really important is that in order to get this one shot, you still have to be playing in the effective range of the Classic pistol. Sometimes a lot of people think that the Classic pistol is so much worse from a closer range, but realistically, it's actually not. They both operate in that same effective range, just the Ghost does a little bit more damage. Now, the fact that the Ghost can one-shot headshot might seem like a huge deal, but something that you can actually do on the Classic is if you connect with the headshot on an enemy, especially if you realize they have a Ghost pistol, you can instantly animation cancel the primary fire with an alternate fire, and as long as you hit the headshot with the primary fire and you hit one of the alternate fires in the chest area, then you'll kill the enemy. So it's almost as fast as a one-shot. Not quite as fast, but it can still be comparable, and you're not paying the full 500. Now, yes, that Ghost can still hypothetically one-shot, but in my opinion, it doesn't bring that much more value than the Classic because you still have to play in its effective range. The one-shot is powerful, I will say that, but for 500 credits, you gotta ask yourself, is there something else that you're giving up for that slight increase in power level? We acknowledge now, based on the stats, that the advantage is there, but it's marginal. So you have to ask, what am I actually missing out on if I spend 500 credits to buy this weapon? Well, the thing is, you could potentially lose very powerful abilities. Many abilities are worth far more than just a slight bump in firepower, especially if you're a character with very powerful abilities, someone like Sage or any utility/sentinel character. Giving up your abilities could be a very big deal, and even abilities like Lear on Reyna could be far more effective than trying to play with the Ghost. Now, if your character doesn't have the most powerful abilities or utility, and you only need about 300 credits worth of utility, then it can be fine to upgrade for that Ghost, because you definitely want to spend all your money and get the most amount of value with that 800 credits, because like we said before, winning that one round is so important, and it could snowball later on. There's not a big point in trying to save all your money in the first round, because winning this one round matters more than winning any other round in the entire game. Now we have to talk about armor in general, because a lot of people ask, should we buy armor? Well, it really depends on your role and your abilities. Essentially, you need to evaluate whether your utility versus armor, and can you make a perfect mix and match? Now, some characters would rather just stack on all their utility. Someone like Sage, they want to be playing a Classic pistol with all their utility, especially on defense, because the utility is so powerful and it's so important for them to have it. But when you're a character like Phoenix, for example, with flashes at 200 credits, you could potentially buy 2 flashes, and you only are at that 400 credits, so you can't buy a Ghost pistol at that point, but you can easily buy armor. So having a Classic plus 2 flashes and armor can be a way that you easily set up scenarios where you can trade out, and you're a little bit more durable with that slight amount of armor, making it so you can tank a one-shot from a Ghost pistol. Essentially, what you need to do is you need to look for ways to fit in armor if it doesn't sacrifice powerful utility in the process, and you need to evaluate the risk versus reward there. Don't put too much stake in armor, but if you can mix and match it in a way that makes sense, then definitely go for it, especially if you're going to be initiating onto the enemy with something like a flash. Now, a general rule of thumb, if you have the classic pistol, just make sure that if an ally has the pistol and they die, the ghost pistol, make sure you grab it. Or if you kill an enemy with the ghost pistol, there is literally no downside in grabbing their pistol off the ground. But keep in mind that if they fired their whole clip, you might have to pick it up and reload. But generally, make sure that you upgrade your classic pistol for essentially free. Even if it doesn't bring that much advantage, it's still free advantage on the table. Now, moving on, let's tell you exactly how you're going to play attack in pistol round. So on attack, you should be pushing in aggressively so that you could trade out with enemies and take huge fights with enemies where you can essentially trade out with focus fire. Especially if you were pushing onto a site, enemies cannot all stack on the same site, so you have an advantage in that capacity if you push through very fast. And if the enemy didn't buy enough good utility to stop you or punish you, you can just run over them for free and just get some free kills. Now, you want to trade out for every kill. You don't want to be caught up and slow down because you definitely don't want to give the enemy time to rotate. And you want to try to plant the spike down ASAP, put the enemy on a time crunch, and flip the advantage in your favor. Now, you can always change your mind if you're pushing a point. Keep in mind, like, if you're about to push in through default and you notice that there's 3 or 4 people on one site, they might have stacked a site, you can quickly rotate to the other site. But speed matters here, and sometimes making the not perfect decision quickly is far better than making the perfect decision far too slowly. A general rule of thumb is when you're on attack in pistol round, you don't have to be as worried about long sight lines because the effective range for a lot of these guns is far smaller than most of the other guns in the game. So really keep that in mind. You don't have to be as cautious of places like heaven, but you need to be far more cautious of an enemy swinging around a close angle. Also, what you need to understand about attack is some utility will be exponentially more or less powerful. For example, while Sage's utility is an absolute must on defense, which I'm going to talk about next, on attack, when you're pushing it aggressively, having armor or even a ghost can get more value than having something like a barrier that might not get as much value. You need to evaluate exactly how you're going to use your ability first and foremost, and then decide for yourself, where should my money go that will get me more value? Because if you're just running and rushing onto point and just trying to plant really aggressively, maybe a barrier wall is good, but maybe you don't want to actually rock with things like ice or anything like that. You need to evaluate these things for yourself and understand that some types of abilities, things like trapwire or certain types of abilities on some characters, are going to be far better on defense as opposed to attack, and you don't have to buy the same attack and defense every single time. Now, for defenders, a huge reason to buy utility, and this is why you really need to buy utility, is to prevent those huge rush pushes. We talked about how on attack, you should definitely push in as a 5-man team. You should push in really aggressively. As a defender, you need to try to stop this, and it's really hard to do it with gunplay because you could get swung on by multiple enemies and it's really easy for them to trade out with you. You need to be using utility that delays, punishes, or stops the enemy altogether. Things like slow orbs, paint shells, or anything like that that could potentially punish enemies or stop them from pushing onto sight. Now, if you don't have any way to stop enemies from rushing you, a trade at most is the best you could hope to receive, but more often than not, you might not be able to kill enemies at all, and you might do a lot of damage, but that doesn't matter because your teammates, when they retake the site, they still have to guard multiple angles because even if a target's at 1 health, they can still threaten them. So that is something that you really need to keep in mind. Often, if you run out of utility and your team have not rotated yet, it is far better for you to back off and regroup with your team as opposed to dying and making it a lot harder for you to guard multiple angles during the retake. Now, another thing on defense that is really underrated but actually very powerful is be proactive if you know that the enemy is hard pushing a site. Especially if you're someone like a dueler and you have the utility to match that kind of thing, or if you have armor. If your teammates are delaying, they're trying to delay, but 4 or 5 people are trying to push onto the side aggressively, making an aggressive flank around the backside can pincer the enemy and puts a lot of pressure on them where they can't retreat and rotate and they can get caught out before they plant the spike. So that is something that you definitely need to do. Sometimes rotating through the backside will take too long and you could do this really aggressively, but keep in mind that you can't be predictable with this strat, but it's very powerful, especially specifically on Haven where there's 3 points. Flanking is an A1 strategy that you should definitely put in your back foot, especially on defense, because if the enemy rushes a site really quickly and your teammates delay them for a certain amount of time but don't get any help or peel, then they could potentially die and you're going to set yourself up for a really bad scenario because you as a team didn't punish the enemy fast enough. Now, moving on to the next topic we have to talk about, but this is a really important one. It's about post pistol round. Now, make sure that you buy armor at a reasonable price with a good weapon like a Spectre after you win pistol round. the reason you do this is you really want to snowball your advantage and gain a free round in the process. A lot of times the enemies are going to save so that they can easily afford full armor plus a Vandal or a Phantom in the preceding round, round 3. Now, keep in mind, on the second round, make sure that you don't take fights from too close because you really want to play in your effective range. And sometimes enemies will really mix it up with shotguns or things like that, or they'll try to rush push you even more. It's actually way more likely that they rush push you with pistols because they can't afford to take straight up 1v1s with you when you have a Spectre because they're just at such a big disadvantage. So what they're going to try to do is really rapidly rush onto a point. They're going to try to trade out for you, and then some number of them are going to try to grab the Spectre so that they get to trade up in value and actually potentially plant and clutch up a point. So do not set yourself in these situations where they swing onto you from close ranges and take your gun. That's how you can actually give them an opportunity to clutch the round. Now, after you win the second round, which you should because you have such an overwhelming advantage, the preceding fight is one where you shouldn't buy at all, especially if you still have your Spectre. This is what we would call a bonus round, and the enemy is definitely going to be buying ARs plus armor, but you got to realize that the distance between an AR and a Spectre is far smaller than the difference between a pistol and a Spectre. So you really get a chance to actually win this round, especially if you fight in that close effective range. And if you win it, you can trade up for the enemy's AR, and even if you lose it, you get to save your money for the preceding round. On top of that, if you manage to win, you could potentially snowball even more so because the round after that, the enemies are going to have to save. And then the round after that, the enemies are going to be able to buy ARs, but your team is going to be able to actually afford operators, which puts you in even a bigger advantage. And that's a way that you can actually snowball the first pistol round win. And if you win the bonus round, you could turn that into 5, 6, 7 rounds won in a row. So it's really worth the risk here with very little downside, all that being said. Speaking of really little downside, there's no downside in smashing that sub button. Come on, look at that sub button. Look down, scroll down, smash it, unsmash it, and then smash it again. Please smash that sub button. Anyways, if you agree or disagree with anything I said, or if you always run it down mid with the shorty or frenzy, definitely let me know in the comments down below. But that's all we got for you today. I'm Coach Mills, and until next time,